Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Gates.
Yield to Mr. Roy.
I thank the gentleman from Florida. I thank the witnesses for being here. I just want to clarify the record here for a second. The idea that the fact that fentanyl is caught at ports of entry and that is the only place that is coming through is belied by the facts, and is belied by the facts that the Border Patrol is now distracted processing human beings, just as the judge from El Paso just described, but just ignores the impact on what that does to the actual border. The Border Patrol can't possibly catch all of the fentanyl at the ports of entry, nor catch the fentanyl between the ports of entry. Mr. Daniels, do you agree with that assessment?
I do. We've had a depletion in Border Patrol because they've been taken to other areas where processing is more important.
And is it your experience that fentanyl pours in between the ports of entry and that fentanyl does in fact get into our communities in mass quantities today due to our open border?
Yes.
I appreciate that. Now, Mr. Dunn, obviously in the introduction, I talked about you being from the county in which I live, in Hays County. You testified, Mr. Dunn, earlier that it was not just Noah who passed away in Hays County last year due to fentanyl poisoning in our community. Is it not true that 3 other Hays Independent School District students died from fentanyl overdoses in our community in Hays County last summer? Is that accurate?
That's correct. And a 4th 14-year-old died in January of this year.
Just a couple of weeks ago?
Yes.
Another family.
And during the Christmas break, 6 other students were poisoned by fentanyl, but they were successfully saved.
And last summer, there were another 8 who were brought back through the use of Narcan. Is that correct?
Correct.
Mr. Dunn, your lovely bride, Janelle, is Hispanic, yes?
Yes.
Do you believe that believing in a secure border makes one racist or anti-Hispanic?
Not in the slightest. Her family actually holds that same position.
I thank you for that. You guys have been active now in a number of organizations trying to get out and understand the lost voices of fentanyl. Is that right?
Yes.
Worked with Ms. Virginia Krieger.
Yes.
And she's lost her daughter due to Percocet that was laced with fentanyl. Is that correct?
Yes.
And the people that have been the lost faces of fentanyl, I've done this before. Noah is one of these lost voices due to fentanyl now.
He is now. I'm not sure if he's included in that picture.
And these pictures are the faces of Americans who are no longer with us due to fentanyl flowing throughout our communities. Now, these are young individuals who are not here today. Now, Noah's not here today. Do you care precisely whether or not fentanyl is coming through ports of entry or between ports of entry, or was your family directly impacted because fentanyl is flooding into our communities one way or the other?
However it gets here, it's here.
And in your experience talking to other family members and talking to law enforcement personnel, is it your observation and belief that the overwhelming flood at our borders, distracting Border Patrol from being able to carry out their duty to stop the flow between the ports of entry or do inspections at the ports of entry, is resulting in more fentanyl pouring into our communities that is then resulting in the death of Americans and, in fact, the death of migrants in the process?
Yes, most of the fathers that I speak with that are not as vocal as the mothers, the common thing they've expressed to me is to come up here and let people know that it's a border issue. It's not an immigration issue. It's flooding across the borders because there's a problem at the borders.
In your communication with families who have lost loved ones due to fentanyl poisonings, do you believe that it is an imperative that this country's federal government, who has a constitutional obligation to secure the border of the United States, do so in order to ensure that we stop the flow of fentanyl and dangerous and illicit narcotics into the United States, resulting in the death of Americans?
Yes.
Do you believe that if this country adopted policies that enabled us to restrict and stop the flow of fentanyl, and that includes ensuring that we have no longer a flood of human beings at our border, while still maintaining asylum laws and protecting people who are being persecuted under actual threat of persecution for their religious and political beliefs, do you believe that stopping the flow of individuals, enabling Border Patrol to stop fentanyl, that is a critical imperative, and if that were adopted, would help save lives like Noah's?
I do, and most others that I talk with feel the same way.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn. Thank you, Janelle. I yield back.
Time has expired. The gentleman from Rhode Island, Mr. Cicilline.
I thank the chairman, Mr. Daniels, with respect to that previous point. There's been about 4.7 million apprehensions under the current administration. Is that unprecedented in your eyes?
Yes.
2.7 million people have been released into the United States. Is that unprecedented, in fact, way off the charts compared to past numbers?
Yes.
The extent to which fentanyl is pouring into our communities, is that precedented?
Yes.
Or is it precedented? It's unprecedented, correct?
Yes.
Yeah.
I
I would ask the Judge Samaniego, you testified that there's no invasion. There were 162,000 encounters in the El Paso sector alone in the first quarter of this fiscal year. Does that sound correct? According to Border Patrol numbers. 55,000 in December alone. Is that correct? We had the Democrat mayor of El Paso who has been busing people to New York City. Truth?
Nope.
The Democrat mayor of El Paso has not been putting people on buses, sending them to New York City.
Not without notification at the other end.
Okay, but they're putting them on buses and sending them to New York City. And New York City today is asking the federal government for money to process individuals that they're dealing with overflowing in New York City. Now, you testified earlier that you weren't getting help from the state of Texas. Now, the city of El Paso declared emergency, but has the county declared emergency?
No.
No, the county has not declared emergency.
No, we did not.
The earlier testimony that you had before, you testified that this effort to want to secure the border is racist. So here's a question for you. 50% of Border Patrol are Hispanic. Border Patrol overwhelmingly wants us to change policies to secure the border. Not just as some are testifying that we need more resources. I know that Mr. Daniels, Sheriff Daniels, testified that having 20,000 additional agents would be helpful. The answer to that is, of course. Of course, having more personnel would be helpful. But the question is what do they most want? Mr. Daniels, what does Border Patrol most want to secure the border? Do they want policy changes to actually enforce the law, or do they want more resources? Which would they rank higher?
Policy changes.
What kind of policy changes? Enforcing the laws of the United States at the border?
Enforce the rule of law, and I'll share this add-on too, support from, they feel like they're not being supported by this administration.
If we had a law that said that we should follow current law to detain individuals claiming asylum for the pendency of the adjudication of that claim, to require that they be detained according to current law, would that be banning asylum?
No.
And if people are claiming in this committee that it is banning asylum, would that be untrue?
Yes.
Hector Garza works in Laredo, Texas for Border Patrol. He's a friend. He is Hispanic. He said, the mother of all caravans isn't just materializing out of the ether, it's just the most recent wave of an invasion that is being aided and abetted by liberal activists who believe that subverting United States law is the best way to achieve their radical policy objectives. Mr. Daniels, do you believe that Hispanic Border Patrol agent Hector Garza is racist by describing what we're experiencing at the border as an invasion and suggesting that it is in fact the policies of liberal activists represented by my Democratic colleagues in this committee and in this House, that is what is subverting United States law? Do you believe that is racist?
No.
Judge Samaniego, do you believe that there, in light of your statement saying that these policies that are being promoted to secure the border, that you think that Border Patrol agent Hector Garza, a lifelong public servant working for the Border Patrol in Laredo, Texas, an Hispanic, a Texan, it's racist for that Hispanic American to say that it is an invasion, that his Border Patrol personnel are overwhelmed, that he believes that it is the liberal policies that are making a mockery of our current laws to say that we should enforce the laws, that we should enforce the laws on the books, that is in fact a racist statement by Hispanic Border Patrol agent Hector Garza?
Well, it's a freedom of speech, and he can say whatever he needs to say. I can tell you that if you ask the Border Patrol in El Paso, they're looking for assistance, that we do not detain them because they don't have the space, they don't have the personnel.
I appreciate that, I appreciate that, but I would just suggest to you is that that is not a racist statement to say that we think we should secure the border. This chart, Mr. Daniels, can you see it from there? Can you see the uptick in the numbers here, way up here?
Yes.
That chart reflects the uptick in migrant deaths. That's 2020 to 2022. Almost 1,000 migrant deaths at the southwest border of the United States. We had 53 migrants die in a tractor trailer in San Antonio, cooked in the Texas heat. 57 were killed when a tractor trailer crammed with migrants rolled over the highway, crashing in Mexico's southern state of Chiapas. Ask me this, is it Christian for migrants to be treated like that and to die in tractor trailers? Would anybody at this panel think it's Christian? Mr. Dunn, you go to church in Hays County. Is it Christian to allow migrants to die like that?
This
No.
gentleman's time has expired.
It is not.
Thank you, Mr. Dunn.
Thank you. Before I call on you, I have a few articles that I want to read into the record. El Paso forced to bus immigrants out of town.
I thank the chairman for his remarks. And I'm just going to follow up, Judge, with the question of you and I came to agreement about the numbers of 55,000 roughly that had been encountered in December in the El Paso sector. Some 200 and I can't remember the exact number. I'm sorry, 145 or 50,000 encountered over the fiscal year, the 3 months. How many of those encountered have been turned away under Title 42?
Have been what?
How many of those have been turned away under Title 42 with respect to the?
I'm not sure of that number, but I think from the Border Patrol, they're looking at about 35%.
Yeah, that tracks with the numbers that I understand, right? So you're talking about of the 55,000, you'd have 18 to 20,000 that would have been turned away under Title 42. You have 15, you'd have about 50,000 of those 150,000 would have been turned away under Title 42. Yet we know that there was a situation in El Paso with the difficulty of dealing with the processing of the numbers. We've got busing going on across the country. Like, what happens if Title 42 is no longer being enforced?
Well, I think you're doing the right thing because, as you know, it was a public health mandate. It had nothing to do with migration. And I think if you want to figure out and get to the problem, that was very confusing because it had to do with something totally different that is now being utilized. I think to me, I think the reason we would lift it is because we can continue the process and do it properly, and you're not going to have all of these other individuals that are trying to cross illegally because that's their only way to get here. Because I've said over and over that there's a lot of them that have been stuck in the middle, that they came thinking that Title 42 was going to be lifted, and when it wasn't lifted, then they fell into this desperation. And that's, I believe, and I've said it over and over, that if we
So Judge, and I'm running out of time. I'm sorry. I don't want to, we just have limits on time.
No, go ahead.
I would say to you that what you just described is all in the context of border security. It's all in the context of who comes in and who doesn't, right? Which is what border security is. So there have been some who have been critical of saying that we should enforce our existing laws with respect to asylum laws. Asylum laws which require detention. That's what our current laws require. Detention while you make a determination, right? A determination of credible fear for persecution under our asylum laws, which is a smaller number than the number of people who are coming that would qualify. And so we're saying we should detain in order to make those determinations. The connection to Title 42 is really important because the current administration is, even in all of its bluster about Title 42, still defending the law in court because they know what happens when Title 42 goes away. And what you just described is really important for the American people to understand. You just described it in the context of border security, not the context of COVID and a pandemic, because it has been being used as a border security Band-Aid. And what we must do as a body is embrace policy changes to ensure we can effectuate management of the flow while respecting our laws with respect to asylum, which is precisely what House Republicans are putting forward, notwithstanding the allegations of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. And I'm over my time. I yield back.
To Mr. Biggs? No, okay. Chair recognizes Mr. Roy.
Thank my colleague from Texas, and I would simply note, and I just came from another hearing, I know we've got votes coming on the floor, the extraordinary concern that we have with bureaucrats making law. right? I mean, that's at the crux of this. We can talk about guns, we can talk about putting bad guys in jail, I'll do that in a minute. But at the crux of this is a bureaucrat making a unilateral decision to try to turn millions of Americans into felons, to advance a radical leftist agenda, which is clearly what is at play. And I wonder if, Ms. Swear, if you could comment, to the extent you already haven't, but just to reiterate, the extent to which the unilateral action by bureaucrats at an agency, at ATF, to do what Congress has not done, how that is clearly in violation of our separation of powers principles at play.
So our Constitution, as you mentioned, is set up with separated powers. You have the executive branch whose job is to enforce the law, and you have Congress who passes laws because Congress is held accountable to the people. They are the ones who are elected. No official at the ATF is, or any other agency, is elected and held accountable through the democratic process.
And you believe the ATF has abused its rulemaking authority here?
Yes, and it has done so in a way that infringes on rights without the American people having a process by which to recall those appointees.
And so therefore, is it your position that the rulemaking in question is in fact unconstitutional and unlawful?
Yes, in several capacities.
And therefore, though it being applied to American citizens would be unlawful and unconstitutional, and therefore Congress, in its duty and separation of powers, has an obligation to check that overrun executive branch. Would the gentlelady agree?
I would, yes.
Well, I appreciate that. And, I would note, I heard one of my Democratic colleagues earlier, complaining that if we were to go after individuals who are violent criminals, that somehow that would put more people in prison. Yes, that is in fact the goal and the objective of that effort, is if people are violating the law and they are violent and they are a danger to society, then yes, I want them to be in prison. And as a former federal prosecutor who prosecuted bad guys with guns under Project Safe Neighborhoods, a bipartisan effort to try to target criminals who are using guns to carry out violent acts and crime against the American people, yes, I put bad guys in jail. And I'm glad. I'm glad. I hope we can put more bad guys in jail. But I don't want to put law-abiding citizens in jail who are exercising their Second Amendment rights and being able to defend themselves in their communities. And yet, that's what we're having an executive branch bureaucrat unilaterally decide to do. This should send shivers down the spine of all members of Article 2. And look, I don't view this through the lens of it being a Democratic administration. I didn't like it when the Trump administration was doing stuff like this. Whether it was the bump stock ban, I didn't like that either. But my colleagues on the other side of the aisle no doubt loved that because they loved the policy outcome. I thought that was bad. I thought it was bad that you go down the road of using executive power with respect to building a wall, which I support. I do support building a wall, but I don't support unending use of emergency powers to carry out that kind of executive action, and I introduced legislation in the previous administration to address that. Because I think we should actually, on a bipartisan basis, try to stand up against the overreach of the executive branch. And in fact, it is our duty in Congress to do so, irrespective of which party is holding power in the executive branch. I would only ask one last question to Mr. Bosco. When you were involved with the creation and development of the stabilizing brace, in your wildest dreams, did you think a bureaucrat would try to say that you didn't have a Second Amendment right to be able to use that? And could you please extol and accentuate the benefits of the brace?
I never would have thought that ATF would unilaterally make a decision through the bureaucratic process to ban my product. Again, and as I said before, that's up to you guys. That's not up to a bureaucratic agency. The product was designed, again, as a safety product, an orthotic device. It changes nothing on the firearm. I have no disagreement with ATF's ability to do their job of putting criminals in prison, but I don't think anybody on this side should agree to give the ATF the authority to unilaterally make a product illegal and circumvent the legislative process. That's the only reason I'm here to talk about with you guys, is to say that. I don't want ATF to do that. If you want to do that, then you do that. But don't let an executive agency circumvent your power, your authority.
With that, I yield back. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair.
Talk to you. If you need to step out, please just excuse yourself, and Capitol Police, make sure you know where you're going out there. With that, I yield to the gentleman from 5 minutes to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. Much has been made about why we are in New York City. In a memorable moment shortly before he was elected, former Mayor Rudolph Giuliani told an editorial board meeting he cared about statistics, but the real measure would be whether people actually feel safer. That, he said, was the ultimate test of policing and political leadership. He said that in 1993 when New York was averaging 2,000 murders a year. By 2013, it was down to 333 due to the strong support of law enforcement and the anti-crime policies adopted by the city. Got down to 288 by 2018, but now it is back up to the mid-400s. I think this is the question, is whether or not you feel safe. And the question I'd ask of Ms. Brame, Ms. Harrison, others, do you feel safe in New York City right now?
No.
Yeah. Mr. Alba, do you feel safe in New York City? Right. And Mr. Giacomo, your history in law enforcement, you said it's as unsafe as you've ever seen it today in New York.
Yes, that's correct.
And isn't that the ultimate measure? Isn't that the question? And I think one of the things that I think merits focusing on is the question that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have been talking about in terms of jurisdiction. What is the jurisdiction here? Mr. Giacomo, are you familiar with 922G and 924C in the federal code?
No, I'm not. I'm sorry.
922G being felons in possession, 924C being the ability to be able to go after somebody and give it a heightened sentencing for their use of firearms and crimes. And my question here, we might suspend?
The committee will suspend. The gentleman is recognized to continue.
All right, so we're back on. 922G and 924C, these are federal crimes, right? And they're federal crimes that we have programs like Project Safe Neighborhoods that work with local law enforcement, where we have the United States Attorney's Office in coordination to try to combat crime and the use of firearms in crimes. Now, I suppose we could go through and look at the laundry list of legislation that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle have introduced to repeal said federal laws, that these federal laws should not exist. Now, we want to have a debate about federalism about that. Happy to have it. But we're not doing that, are we? Because that's not what this is about. It's about show. The fact is we do have federal laws on the books to go after criminal misuse of firearms, but they're not being enforced. And they're also not being enforced at the local level. Those are the facts. And the facts are we're letting criminals out of jail. If you look at the data is clear. The average criminal has 11 prior arrests, 5 criminal convictions. 77% have 5 plus.
We need the crowd to be quiet, please. Thank you.
5 plus prior arrests. 74% have prior violent arrests. 30% have prior arrests for guns and weapon offenses. Even though these individuals have lengthy criminal records, 52% served a year or less. 60% are rearrested within 2 years of release. The fact is we have a recidivism problem, and we have now gone down the road of decarceration. Hundreds of thousands of criminals have been released. Just since 2020, the incarcerated population is down about 300,000. When it was 2.1 million, which, by the way, was pretty far down from the levels when we had the safest numbers and the safest streets in the city. But this isn't about some libertarian worldview of letting out a few potheads who are allegedly rotting in jail. 88% of prisoners are incarcerated in the state systems for murder, rape, robbery, and assault. It's responsible for most of those sentences. A mere 14% are in custody primarily for narcotics offenses, and the vast majority of these are felony trafficking crimes and misdemeanor possession. My question is for you, Mr. Giacomo, is do you think that we have a problem with the gun issue, or do you think we have a problem with letting criminals out on the streets?
Well, the criminals are being let out at an alarming rate. And I just want to make it clear here that the guns, I'm speaking for New York City, the guns that are being used here in New York City are illegal guns.
Yeah.
They're illegal guns that are brought here into New York City and being used to victimize the people.
And are they being prosecuted heavily by the DA here?
No, they're not.
Right. And isn't that the problem?
That is a major problem.
And are they being prosecuted in coordination with the United States Attorney's Office using 922G and 924C to prosecute it?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Right. And isn't that fundamentally the problem?
Correct.
Question I have, my colleagues on the side of the aisle mentioned former President Trump a number of times. I would just ask, was it former President Trump, Ms. Brame, that killed your son?
No.
Ms. Harrison, was it former President Trump that killed your loved ones?
No.
Was it former President Trump that stabbed Mr. Alba? Was it former President Trump that prosecuted Mr. Alba and prosecuted him for defending himself? No. I yield back.
I thank the chairman. I would note that were my child one of the 15%, even if I take the chairman or the ranking member, I should say, at his word, I would be pretty frustrated about your child being lost. If you send your kids to school and they say, well, we kept up with 85% of them, boy, would you feel good about the education system? Because what about those other 15% of kids? Even if you take the ranking member at his word. I've got a FOIA request here from Judicial Watch from, this is now 6 years dated, that has a laundry list of incidents put out by ORR through a FOIA request detailing laundry list of abuses of children. This one, young girl reported she was inappropriately touched by an unknown male immigrant in the group after entering the U.S. Another one, several appeals reported staff they were inappropriately touched. Another one where somebody paid money to have sex with her. Another, I can just go down the list of hundreds of these examples. And somehow in the greatest country in the history of the world, the most powerful country in the history of the world, we think this is a system that we should defend. It blows my mind that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle want to defend a system of laws that allows this to occur to children and then brush away that MAGA extremist New York Times for daring to point out that 85,000 kids aren't being found from the first contact, my colleagues on the side of the aisle say. Oh, okay. We just didn't get them on that first call. I would ask each of the witnesses very quickly, do you think that the data is showing that since President Biden took office that 356,665 unaccompanied alien children have crossed the southern border that we know of and been placed in HHS custody? Is a system that attracts that number of children unaccompanied to come across our border, to be exploited by cartels, to be put into the sex trafficking trade, to be put into the slave labor trade, to be sexually abused, to die on ranches in South Texas, to drown in the Rio Grande? Yes or no? Is that a system that you're proud of as an American and that you think is good?
No, Congressman.
Thank you, ma'am. Ms. Rodriguez.
No, sir, I'm appalled.
Ms. Vaughn.
No, indeed.
Mr. Kerry.
I'd like to point out.
It's yes or no question. Are you proud of a system in this country that has 356,000 unaccompanied alien children that allow that to occur to children? That we know, by your own acknowledgement and testimony, by our own understanding, children are being abused, raped, they get killed in this process. The system that we've created to allow and attract that flood across our border, do you think that is a good system, and are you proud of it as an American?
These children are fleeing violence and threats of death in their country of
The
origin.
numbers have been spiking under this administration because of the policies of this administration, and it is well documented. I just want to make clear, you're standing behind the policies of this administration, that you're proud of these policies and what that is allowing to occur to these children.
I do not currently work for the administration. I was...
Doesn't matter to me. Are you proud of this administration's policies and what currently is occurring to these children because of the policies attracting 356,000 unaccompanied alien children when we know the data? 85,000 lost, reams of scores. You worked there, you know, of the rapes, of the people getting killed, of the slave labor. Do you think this is a system that we should say we're proud of?
I believe we should provide protection to children who are fleeing death and persecution.
Let me ask you a different question.
And they should be allowed an opportunity for
Do you believe that the TVPRA policies adopted, that unchecked and unfixed by this current Democratic administration and by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, did that have anything to do with attracting all of those children across the border?
Well, I do believe that the Trafficking Victims Protection Act is an important component of U.S. child protection.
Is it a magnet right now, the way it is currently constructed, why children were riding on the top of train cars? President Obama was appalled. Jay Johnson was appalled. This administration doesn't seem to care. Yes or no, is our current system a magnet to kids?
I do not believe it is.
You don't believe it's a magnet?
No.
Well, that's the problem. I yield back.
The gentleman yields back. Next, I'd like to recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
I thank the chairman. Thank you for appearing before the committee. Director, I served in the U.S. Attorney's Office, prosecuted 922G1, 924C, felons in possession, and so forth. I would say that, well, let me ask you this question. There are different definitions of mass shootings. We've said that, I think, 160 or something mass shootings this year, or something in that zip code. However you define that.
I believe...
Not necessarily get to the question. In your reporting of that, how many of those shooters can you report were on medication?
I don't know the facts to be able to answer that. I'm sorry.
Okay, I think that's an important thing, and I'd like ATF to get us an answer on the 165 mass shootings. How many were on medication? How many were from single parent homes without fathers?
Again, those may not be all ATF investigations, and I don't know the answer to that.
Well, but it's important you guys collect data on virtually everything. I think it's really important for us to know that. Can you tell us how many of the perpetrators were, for example, involved in social media and certain websites, or how many of them had dropped out of school?
Again, I don't have a number on that. I would agree with you that those are all significant problems that we have to address as a society.
Well, I think that's something that's really important, and I want ATF to get us that information, because that has been missing from a lot of the conversation. As we focus in on the weapons being used, I want us to make sure that we're very clear about the nature of the individuals that are carrying out these heinous acts. What is happening in our societies? What is happening to our young men? What is happening to young men in fatherless homes? What is happening to people on medication? What is happening with respect to mental health? Because if we look at the data and we see what has occurred, particularly under COVID, and we look at both suicide rates up like 10%, murder rates spiked like 40%, and I think with the use of firearms, we see that we had a serious mental health issue and the use of medication. I think that's something the ATF ought to focus on. But here's something that I want to ask about. You all had an ATF agent named Brandon Garcia who submitted a resignation letter, I think you're probably familiar with, in which he wrote, ATF has been spending a significant amount of time talking about and changing the course of this agency to focus on, quote, the guns, end quote. Agent Garcia also noted the following. Last year, our headquarters spent pretty much the entire year talking about the vaccine and threatening termination for those who wouldn't get it. The deputy director threatened to prosecute agents for lying to a federal agent if we did not appropriately update our vaccination status in the system. He also noted that they were saying nothing about holding people accountable for the crimes they commit unless it supports their agenda. I think that's a question that I think we all want to know the answer to, which is, are we focusing on going after criminals carrying out bad acts, harming the American people
every day
for use of guns,
every day,
as opposed to targeting law-abiding citizens for the use of having a weapon that they are entitled to be able to have under the Second Amendment?
We are indeed focusing on taking violent criminals and trigger pullers out of our community. Of course, working with state and local law enforcement, right? Every day, and you know that from being a PSN prosecutor. I was a PSN prosecutor also. Those are very important. And with respect to the causes of these acts, I think it is correct there are numerous causes. ATF is not responsible for addressing them. Of course, Congress, you look at the whole field of play as to what drives violent
But does
crime.
the director agree that it would be a very important thing for us as Congress and for ATF to focus on the mental state and the medicines being used by the perpetrators of these crimes?
I think certainly that public policymakers ought to focus on that.
Well, I appreciate that. And I'm going to run out of time. One other, because I got limited time. Sure. One other question with respect to the issue we're dealing here with the pistol braces. We know for sure that the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit has overwhelmingly ruled that ATF overstepped its authority when it published the final rule that classified bump stocks as machine guns. Now, to make sure that it's very clear that I'm an equal opportunity basher of tyranny, the Trump administration issued that bump stock rule, and they were wrong to do it. They shouldn't have done it. They did it, the Fifth Circuit struck it down. The fact is, what we know about this rule, the pistol brace rule, is that it is the exact same overstepping of power. And that I think the director ought to respond to that question in just 1 minute, but I want to ask one question pretty quick right here as I wrap up. Do you believe that Americans have an individual right to bear arms?
The Supreme Court has said that. So yes, that the Supreme Court has said in the Heller decision and then in the Bruin decision that the Second Amendment,
individual right
the Second Amendment gives the individual right to keep and bear arms.
And so what I would just suggest to the director is that when we know the Fifth Circuit has slapped down a regulatory overreach with respect to bump stocks under a Republican president, and now we have an effort here under pistol braces, which is looking backwards to take a piece of plastic, as my friend from Kentucky said, to add to a weapon, and to say to someone who had a lawful product for the entire time they've had it, to now say that it is unlawful. Would the director agree that that is something that the Fifth Circuit is very well going to look at and say that is an overstep of the executive branch over legislative authority? I yield back.
You may answer the question.
As with the bump stock case, it is in litigation. Different circuits have come out different ways on that, and I think there's a petition for certiorari before the Supreme Court. ATF's position on that, I mean the department's position, is laid out in hundreds of pages of briefs. The first ruling, which actually came out of a district court in the Fifth Circuit on the stabilizing brace rule, found that it lived within the statute and was lawful under the APA, at least as a preliminary injunction matter.
But the Fifth Circuit has held that it has said that it is
courts,
violative.
again,
The gentleman yields. Ms. Scanlon, you have 5.
Conflict and walked in a little bit late today, but I just point out that Ms. Del Turco's report also includes reports of at least 57 pro-abortion acts of hostility against churches between January 22 and September 2022, and that this extends to pregnancy centers as well. It's all related. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy. 5 minutes.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Houck, after your family was raided in the early morning in front of your family, has the Biden administration in any way, shape, or form apologized for what they did to you or your family?
No, Congressman.
No apology?
No.
None. And as we've heard today, you are specifically targeted because you're an activist, you're a pro-life activist.
Correct.
Question for Ms. Camp. Earlier, you mentioned in your reports, you were quoting articles in which the FBI made statements about attacks on abortion clinics. How many statements by the FBI have there been on attacks on crisis pregnancy centers?
Thank you for the question, Congressman. I don't have that information.
Right, because I'm not aware of there being any. What percentage of abortion-related violence cases or threats cases or cases of violence or threats are threats against pro-life organizations?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
What percentage of abortion-related violence cases or threats cases are cases of violence or threats against pro-life organizations? The answer is 70%, according to FBI Director Wray, that well-known, pro-life activist. 70%, according to FBI Director Wray. Another question. You serve as the Chief Legal and Strategy Officer at the National Abortion Federation, correct?
Yes.
In this role, have you ever spoken with anyone in the Biden Department of Justice or Biden administration specifically about FACE Act enforcement or abortion?
I have not.
Okay, so you as the Chief Legal and Strategy Officer for the National Abortion Federation, you have had no contact with President Biden's abortion task force.
Let me be accurate. I believe I may have had contact. I don't think so, but I may have. But on the issue of FACE enforcement, no, I have not.
Okay, in 2015, the Center for Medical Progress released a video in which you stated, quote, "I'm like, oh my God, I get it. When the skull is broken, that's really sharp. I get it. I understand why people are talking about getting that skull out, that culvarium. Culvarium being an incomplete skull. When abortion has crushed the skulls of babies to kill them, what physical risks are there for the baby?"
So, Congressman, thank you for the question. It allows me to clarify that the media products you're referring to stoked a massive uptick in violence. Those heavily edited, misleadingly edited media products caused 3 murders and 9 woundings in Colorado Springs in 2015.
The question was about the baby and the skull crushing that is, I think, a direct quote attributed to you.
Well, the folks who distributed those media products may have attributed something to me. I can't speak to.
So, true or false, did you say that? I'm like, oh my God, I get it. When the skull is broken, that's really sharp. Did you say that?
It's impossible to know, Congressman.
Would you have said that? Is that something you would have said?
I don't know, Congressman.
You don't know. You don't know if you talked about the crushing of the skull of a baby. You don't remember having said something like that.
What I do-
I'm pretty confident I've never said something like that. I'm quite confident my colleagues here have never said something like that. Have you ever said something about crushing the skull of the baby, particularly in that kind of a setup?
I believe, Congressman, that we all came here today to agree that violence is never an appropriate response to policy differences.
That seems pretty violent, the crushing of the skull of a baby. I think that actually is the definition of violence. And I think the question here is whether or not we are going to acknowledge and recognize that reality, and the extent to which now the federal government has been weaponized against the people who want to acknowledge that reality. That's the question. Mr. Houck has stood up and said, I'd like to recognize the reality of the violence against a baby. And by the way, the violence against the mother who's been sold a myth by radical leftists in the name of baby killing. They've been sold a myth that it is somehow healthy and good for them or better than for them. And if someone dares stands up like Mr. Houck, then he's been targeted, as my colleague acknowledged from this very dais, targeted by the Federal Bureau of Investigation, which we saw was weaponized specifically against the President of the United States, as we just saw in the Durham report, is weaponized against average citizens. Mr. Houck, do you think $38.5 billion is sufficient funds for the Department of Justice? Or do you think maybe it's too many funds if they're carrying out actions against people like you?
I would think it's too many funds.
I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now yields to the gentleman from Tennessee, Mr. Cohen. 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. A lot of discussion's been on the...
What purpose does the gentlelady seek recognition?
I have a unanimous consent request to enter the following statements into the record. Organizational statements from the Center for Gender and Refugee Studies, Church World Service, and National Immigration Forum.
Without objection. Thank you. Chair now recognizes Mr. Roy of Texas.
I thank the chairman. Mr. Scott, we were just told that we're unable to get workers into this country. True or false, we get somewhere around 1 million green cards every year, and we have seasonal workers that are able to come here and work under our current system under the law.
That's correct.
And currently at our border, what do we have right now in terms of our ability for Border Patrol to stop the flow between ports of entry, or is it in fact that Border Patrol is processing people at the ports of entry?
The Border Patrol stays outside the ports of entry themselves, but the Border Patrol is literally, it's almost acting as a port because they're processing getaways and they're leaving hundreds of miles of border wide open.
For example, at a tent like in Eagle Pass, right, where you've got a 10-acre facility where you're processing 1,500 people a day. Is Border Patrol a part of that operation?
Yes, sir. Yes.
As opposed to actually being on the line and being able to go patrol the border between the ports of entries as they're supposed to do.
Correct. And there's been some numbers reported, but I think what's important is even if half of the Border Patrol agents are deployed to the field at the beginning of shift, within an hour or so, they're overwhelmed with thousands of more illegal aliens, and then they are processing as well, leaving the border wide open.
Chief Scott, do we know how much fentanyl or dangerous narcotics come in between our ports of entry or dangerous individuals?
We have no idea, but there's no shortage in Chicago or New York.
Right, so this claim by my colleagues on the other side of the aisle that all of the fentanyl comes in at the ports of entry, we literally don't know how much is coming in between the ports of entry because Border Patrol is unable to do its job while it's being overwhelmed by the failed policies of this administration. Is that true?
That is accurate. And if you look at the statistics, anytime illegal immigration across the border between the ports slows down, drug seizures actually increase because agents are actually out there identifying it.
Supervisor Kenny, your community has been dramatically impacted, right, by the number of individuals that have been dumped into your community. Can you quickly, because it's just a matter of time, explain how much that has negatively impacted your community?
I'm from Orangetown in Rockland County. We actually obtained a restraining order to prevent them from coming until it goes through the court system. The county just north of us has received hundreds and hundreds at this point, and I can't speak for them.
And you have had hotels filled up with like often single males that are filling up places so that needy individuals aren't able to get facilities and aren't able to get the resources they need. Is that true?
Yeah, the goal of Mayor Adams was to send 340 single adult men to a hotel in my town. It's been put on hold by the courts.
And where is your town again?
In Orangetown, which is 30 miles north of New York City.
Okay, so not on the southern border of the United States.
No.
And so this is something we're dealing with, as my friend from Arizona, Mr. Biggs, knows, and my friend from California, Mr. McClintock, and others know on the border. We deal with it all the time in our communities in South Texas, but this is something that the entire country is now dealing with. And I'd like to now move to Ms. Nobles, and I cannot possibly put into words, Ms. Nobles, what you have experienced as a result of the failed policies of this country. I would simply ask, as carefully as I can, having met with numerous family members who have lost loved ones due to these failed policies, whether it's through violence, as you have unfortunately experienced, or whether it is through, for example, fentanyl poisonings that so many of our moms have experienced. I met with 3 fentanyl moms just 2 weeks ago in Austin, Texas. I've met with dozens. I've met with dozens of individuals who've lost loved ones, including a family member in San Antonio whose son was killed by an illegal immigrant who had been here, had been arrested, let go, arrested, let go, and then burned this woman's son to death. That's what we have going on in our country, while our colleagues on the other side of the aisle bury their head in the sand and pretend that somehow it's compassionate. I would just ask you, Ms. Nobles, to explain whether or not you've had interactions with other moms and family members who have had similar unfortunate experiences as a result of our failed policies.
Unfortunately, I haven't. I haven't seen anybody talk about their story or shared anything about, because I know Kayla wasn't the only one, but where are they? So that's why I'm standing up and talking about her story and getting her story out. At least I can speak for my child and make sure that I make people aware of what's going on.
Well, Ms. Nobles, I'm going to, after this hearing, connect you with angel families who have had a number of these experiences that they've put out, with the Vargas family in San Antonio who have been dealing with loss from these kinds of policies. And I would just ask Chief Scott, are the current policies stopping the kind of violence that can occur through having, for example, in this case, a UAC, an unaccompanied alien child, who ended up carrying out this crime that Ms. Nobles had to suffer from? I want to ask you that question, but I also just want to point out, and before you answer the question, and then I'll yield back, I just came back from the federal district courthouse because I went over there to support Jaime Zapata's family, because Jaime Zapata was gunned down by the cartels in 2011, and the sentencing is going on right now as we speak. Cartels are empowered at our border. They're empowered by China. They're empowered by our own federal government failing to do its job, and Americans are dying as a result, and so are migrants. Mr. Scott, if you can answer that question, and then I'll yield back.
The current crisis is making it impossible to be able to weed out the criminals, especially the UACs, from anyone else. The agents don't have time to do face-to-face interviews. There's no global database of criminal records.
Thank you, Chief Scott.
Mr. Chairman. 2020, refuting claims that Acting Secretary Wolf was acting or was appointed unlawfully and providing the legal justification for his appointment without objection. Chair now recognizes Mr. Roy for 5 minutes.
Well, thank the Chairman. Mr. Reichel Melnick, let me ask you a question. Is Joe Manchin, Senator from West Virginia, is he a racist?
I can't comment on that.
Okay, what about Mark Kelly from Arizona?
Similarly, cannot comment on that.
Maggie Hessen,
Also
Senator
cannot comment.
New Hampshire? Okay, can't comment on their being a racist or not. How about Senator Raphael Warnock from Georgia?
Similarly, I'm not familiar.
Okay, how about Catherine Cortez Masto from Nevada?
Likewise, Mr. Roy.
Okay, can't comment on whether they're racist or not.
I don't have an opinion as to the matter.
Okay, because you called me a racist. And you called me a racist because I said that Title 42 should be enforced. Something, by the way, that this administration did to the tune of over 1 million people.
Believe it's about 2.5 million people, actually.
Right. So this administration is racist?
I believe this administration has made a number of failures on the racial justice front.
So the Biden administration is racist?
I can't comment as the administration in
Interesting.
general.
Good to know. Good to know that the Biden administration is racist and get that on the record. The fact is, people who want to enforce Title 42 believe that there was a reason that Title 42 was put in place, but they also recognize that Title 42 is, in fact, a Band-Aid on a very broken system where the laws were not being enforced otherwise. But to throw around words like racist, let me ask you a question. Is my friend Henry Cuellar, is he a racist?
I can't comment on that.
Right, because Henry Cuellar said the border community is very concerned about Title 42 being lifted. This message of lifting Title 4 is going straight to the criminal organizations. He stood up and said that Title 42 should be enforced. The administration stood up. The senators I just listed said that Title 42 should have stayed in place. Now, my personal view is that Title 42 wasn't the thing that needed to stay in place, that what ought to be in place is an actual border security that secures the border. Mr. Wolf, in your position at the head of the Department of Homeland Security, notwithstanding what my colleagues want to throw around with the ad hominem attacks, you were in fact charged with securing the homeland, right? That was actually your task,
Yes.
securing the homeland at the Department of Homeland Security?
That's correct.
Right. And did you do that?
Yes.
Right. And is the current administration securing the homeland?
No.
No. In any measure, in any way, shape, or form, is the current Secretary of Homeland Security carrying out his duty faithfully under the Constitution to secure the homeland of the United States?
He is not. As I've outlined in my written testimony and oral testimony, there's numerous instances where he is not faithfully executing the law.
I thank you, Secretary Wolf. What I would say is, if you go back to April of 2022, in a Judiciary Committee hearing, I read word for word the statutory definition of operational control under the Secure Fence Act. I read it sitting right over here. There was a chart. And I put up the chart, I put up the text, and the text says, operational control means the prevention of all unlawful entries into the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. I asked Secretary Mayorkas, do you have operational control? And his response was, I do. And Congressman, I think the Secretary of Homeland Security would have said the same thing in 2020 and 2019. In March of 2023, however, in a Senate hearing, Secretary Mayorkas said, quote, with respect to the definition of operational control, I do not use the definition that appears in the Secure Fence Act. And the Secure Fence Act provides statutorily that operational control is defined as preventing all unlawful entries in the United States. By that definition, no administration has ever had operational control. Just 2 weeks prior, United States Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz answered, no, sir, when asked by Homeland Security Chairman Mark Green, does DHS have operational control of the entire southwest border? So the United States Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz says, we do not have operational control of the border. He answered straight up, truthfully, no, sir. Why was it that the Secretary of Homeland Security, when I asked him that question, he said, yes, we have operational control. He said, I do, to be more precise. But then in the Senate, he comes back and says, oh, but no, I'm sorry, if you use that definition, you know, the one in the statute, no one has ever had operational control. What is your response to that, and how would you characterize having operational control of the border, as you would say in the previous administration compared to current?
Well, I would certainly talk about my time in the Trump administration, and if I were to get asked that question, whether we had operational control, the answer was no, we did not. Neither was the border secure, and I think words matter here. Those are very definitive statements. I always talked about how we were making the border more secure, or it was the most secure in our lifetime. But to say that you have complete operational control, to say that the border is closed, to say that it is secure, you're hiding the ball from the American people. You're not being transparent. And it's for a purpose, I think you can only guess, a political purpose, but it also defies what the men and women of the Border Patrol and others are doing down there. When they see their political leadership make these sorts of statements, it's so bad it's hard to find words. They don't know what to think, because they are on the line. They are on that border every single day, watching the hundreds of thousands of individuals walk past them that they have to process. And they see that someone is saying that this border is secure. Or you see the 200 known or suspected terrorists that have come across this border in the last 2 years, but somehow that border is closed and secure. I don't understand it.
Yeah, kind of like accusing people of whipping migrants at the border. I yield back.
Time's up.
Executive branch. Yeah. Gentleman's recognized.
Thank you, Chairman. Mr. Durham, October 3rd, 2016, the FBI offered Christopher Steele $1 million to provide corroborating evidence of the allegations in his reporting. Is that correct?
Yes.
Was that paid to him?
I'm sorry, was that what?
Was that paid to him?
That money was never paid out. There was no corroborating information.
Mr. Steele relied solely on a single unnamed subsource, correct?
He said that he had a primary subsource who had a network of subsources.
On October 18, 2016, the FBI submits the application for Pfizer surveillance relying heavily on the Steele dossier. No corroboration, correct?
And no corroboration for the substantive claims in that.
But they knew Steele was a signed-up paid informant. Could have asked for sources, never did, said he was reliable, no record of reliability, correct?
Mr. Steele had provided information in other areas, not in this area, in prior occasions.
FISA application relied, according to your report, at least in part on the Clinton plan intelligence, correct?
I'm sorry,
And the FISA application relied, according to your report, at least in part on the Clinton plan intelligence, correct?
Yes.
And they knew Steele had been hired by Fusion GPS, and Fusion had been hired by a law firm on behalf of senior Democrats, and that HC was aware, correct?
At various points in time, those things became known to the FBI, yes.
And December 2016, the FBI determined that Igor Danchenko, a Russian national, was previously subject to FBI investigation to be Steele's subsource, correct?
Yes.
They do not talk to Danchenko before the next FISA application, correct?
Correct.
January 12, 2017, the FBI goes back to renew the application for FISA surveillance, correct?
Yes.
Coincidentally, 1 week before Trump is inaugurated, correct?
Correct.
They then, after 2 trips to FISA, finally talked to Danchenko, basically determined it's all crap because they'd been relying on a Democrat operative, Dolan, correct?
Well, part of that is true. They clearly had relied on the information in the Steele dossier. There was a portion of one report from Steele that was definitely tied to Mr. Dolan.
Then in March of 2017, Jim Comey testified here on Capitol Hill that the FBI, under its counterintel authorities, has investigated Trump for collusion with Russia and people might get indicted, correct?
Correct.
Is it normal for the FBI director to talk about FISA-related investigations publicly? As a general matter?
I would say a general matter, I would say no.
Right. And again, knowing full well the uncorroborated allegations and knowing full well the genesis of said investigation was tied to Hillary Clinton's campaign, which the FBI director would have known.
People in the FBI knew that.
Correct. April 2017, they go back to FISA. They report they've interviewed principal source and that the source is credible, but they leave out the entire fact that it's only credible and making clear that they relied upon before was total garbage. They continued through the summer of 2017, correct?
That's correct.
Under federal law and FISA rules, once they know there's an error or some material fact is incorrect in previous applications, you're supposed to correct that, right?
That's correct.
Was that done here, yes or no?
Not at the time.
Was Deputy Director McCabe in charge of this investigation?
Deputy Director McCabe had direct involvement in the investigation.
Was Deputy Assistant Director Peter Strzok heavily involved with the investigation? And was FBI Director Comey briefed on the investigation?
The evidence that we came upon was, they were definitely, this is driven by the 7th floor.
Each FISA application is a verified application, and there's a Woods file with every factual assertion kept in a file, correct?
Correct.
Is it reasonable to believe that senior FBI leadership, and indeed senior leadership at the DOJ, did not know all these failures to ensure truthful facts were used for each FISA application, an application directly focused on an American presidential campaign? Is it reasonable to believe that the senior FBI leadership, and indeed senior leadership at DOJ, did not know these failures?
That I would distinguish between what the FBI knew and what the Department of Justice knew.
So FBI leadership knew it?
The FBI, people in the FBI knew this information. Not everybody knew everything, but they had all of this information.
So 2 final questions. In the fall of 2021, our colleague, Mr. Schiff, said in an interview, but at the beginning of the Russia investigation, I said that any allegations should be investigated. We couldn't have known, for example, people were lying to Christopher Steele. Is it remotely conceivable that the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee and the lead prosecutor of the impeachment of President Trump was uninformed that this investigation was kicked off based on a Clinton campaign Democrat-funded report with a witness, Mr. Steele, claiming facts that were uncorroborated and that ultimately came from a subsource, a Democrat operative, Mr. Dolan? Is that conceivable? And is, in fact, there evidence out of the House Intelligence Committee that directly contradicts that and that he did know, in fact?
I wouldn't know what Mr. Schiff would know, but at the time.
Finally, a final question. For the average American watching this, besides being fired, Have Jim Comey, Andrew McCabe, or Peter Strzok been held accountable for these glaring violations? Have they been hauled before a grand jury or charged in any way? And if not, why not?
So they have not been, well, I'm not going to talk about matters that occurred before the grand jury because I can't. But with respect to have any of those individuals been charged, the answer is no.
I yield back.
Time the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Texas, the other gentleman from Texas is recognized. The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank the chairman. Thank you, Director Wray, for appearing. Brian Auten was one of the FBI intelligence analysts who interviewed Igor Danchenko, the principal source of the Steele dossier, in January 2017, correct?
I believe that's in the Durham report.
And Danchenko explained that the dossier allegations were BS, yet the FBI did not reveal that to the FISA court. Instead, the FBI continued to use those allegations in 2 more sworn FISA applications about President Trump and Putin, correct?
Well, again, I want to let Mr. Durham's report speak for itself.
Okay, but as director of the FBI, those are the facts of the FBI under your watch. The FBI conducted...
No, sir, I'm sorry. It's important. Not under my watch. Those are the facts.
I'm getting to the part under your watch. Okay. The FBI conducted an internal investigation of Auten and sought to suspend him, but Auten appealed, correct?
I can't discuss a specific pending personnel matter.
Okay, well, according to recent reports, those are the facts. Nevertheless, in 2020, after Senators Grassley and Johnson highlighted evidence of potential financial crimes and corruption against the Biden family, the FBI assigned Auten to compile an assessment which was used to characterize the Biden revelations as Russian disinformation. The evidence Grassley and Johnson had collected were mostly financial records and could easily have been corroborated as authentic. And by then, the FBI had the Hunter laptop in its possession for over a year, so it knew the lucrative payments of the Bidens from corrupt and anti-American regimes were authentic. How on earth did the FBI empower an agent under investigation for potentially corrupt performance and abuse of FISA in one politically flawed investigation, a Democrat operative-driven case against President Trump, to play a key role and to undermine a second politically fraught investigation, a case against the Bidens? How's that possible? How can you allow that to occur in the Federal Bureau of Investigation, as my colleagues on the other side of the aisle say, the elite law enforcement agency of the United States? How does that occur?
I can't, at the moment, discuss a pending personnel matter. I can tell you that every employee who in any way touched the Crossfire Hurricane matter has been referred to our Office of Professional Responsibility, our disciplinary
Are you
arm.
concerned about this activity by the FBI and what was communicated to the FISA court? Does that concern you as the director of the FBI?
I consider the conduct that was described in the Durham report as totally unacceptable and unrepresentative of what I see from the FBI every day and must never be allowed to happen again.
And have there been consequences as a result? Is Mr. Auten, has he had consequences?
Well, again, I can't speak to pending personnel matters. As you would perhaps remember from your own time in law enforcement, because we were working closely with Mr. Durham and I assigned agents to help him, at his request, we slowed down the administrative process to allow his investigation to complete itself. Now that it is complete, our personnel processes are very much ongoing.
Well, I think it is more than troubling that under your watch, we see that this continued to occur, and you have Auten continued to be empowered after there was an investigation and after there was an effort by the FBI to look into why he would go to the FISA court and give wrong information. I mean, the issue here has been wrapped up in a cloud of politics, but the fact is the American people deserve to know how the FISA court is being abused and how it's being abused against the former president and against them, in light of the reports that we saw Mr. Johnson from Louisiana put forward that was in a court filing and a court report. I want to move on to another topic. On September 23rd, 2022, 20 heavily armed agents stormed the home of Mark Houck. You're familiar with this?
I'm familiar with the Houck case a little bit, yes.
And this was after Mr. Houck's lawyer reached out and said he would appear voluntarily because the incident in question occurred almost in a year earlier in October of 2021, so a year earlier. And the question here I have, local authorities investigated the incident but concluded there was no case. After the jury met for roughly an hour, Houck was acquitted. How on earth did Mark Houck end up having the FBI send several armed agents along with local authorities to arrest him at gunpoint? And do you approve it? Did you approve of that?
Well, let me start where you ended. Decisions about the manner of an arrest are not something that the FBI director approves. I defer to and rely on the judgment of the experienced career agents on the ground who have both the most intimate understanding of the facts and of the training experience to decide how best to effectuate an arrest.
Do you know who did order it?
And my understanding is that that arrest was conducted in our Philadelphia division by career agents with a combined 40 years of FBI experience.
Do you approve of the raid now in retrospect? Do you think it was appropriate? Do you think it was appropriate for a father to have armed FBI agents along with local agents go to his home, arrest him at gunpoint for alleged violation of the FACE Act a year after the alleged incident, after the father had said through his lawyer that he would appear voluntarily? Do you believe that FBI agents should go to the home of a father in Philadelphia suburbs?
I'm not going to second guess the judgment of the career agents on the ground who made the determination.
But your job is to second guess and look at what they are doing. Your job is to review what they do. Your job is to protect the American people from a tyrannical FBI storming the home of an American family.
I could not disagree more with your description of the FBI as tyrannical. And
you don't believe it's tyrannical that FBI agents were a part of storming a father's home in suburban Philadelphia?
Mr. Chairman. Time of the gentleman's expired. The witness may respond, and then we'll move to our next witness.
Sir, respectfully, member. They did not storm his house. They came to his door. They knocked on his door and identified themselves. They asked him to exit. He did without incident. Whenever our agents, well, not at gunpoint, whenever our agents conduct an arrest, they are armed. Our agents are armed virtually all the time, as you may remember from your own experience as a prosecutor.
The gentleman yields back. The ranking member has a unanimous consent.
I thank the chairman. I thank all the witnesses for being here. Mr. Rosenberg, you explained the tragic loss of your son. If I remember correctly, there were obstacles to the removal of the criminal alien who unfortunately killed your son, and was not the current secretary at that point, Secretary Mayorkas, at that point in the Obama administration. And can you characterize his help or lack of help in ensuring the both prosecution and or deportation of the individual in question?
Well, I didn't know of his involvement at the time, but after the trial and Roberto Gallo was sentenced to 6 months in jail, I met with my congressman, Henry Waxman at the time, and said, I want to make sure this guy is detained and deported. He had somebody write a letter to USCIS, of which Mayorkas was the head of at the time, and he got back a letter that said that Gallo would not be detained or deported because, and this is an exact quote, he's only committed one crime of moral turpitude. And as I learned later on, that was, and as we see today, that's Mayorkas' policy. Killing somebody doesn't necessarily reach the level to be deported.
So the current Secretary of Homeland Security felt that it was not something that merited deportation because he had, quote, only had one crime of moral turpitude.
Yes.
One crime.
Yes.
Does that one crime mean a lot to your family, sir?
Means everything to my family.
Do you think such a statement and a position is befitting of someone who swears an oath to uphold the laws of the United States, whether it was in a position in USCIS under President Obama or now as secretary of a department charged with securing the homeland of the United States?
Well, myself and our group was against his even being appointed. I did get to meet him in 2014. At the time, I still didn't know that he was, part of what happened, in my son's case. And he lied to me constantly. I mean, the one thing you learn when you're in publishing is ask somebody questions that you know the answer to, and if they lie, you'll know they're lying.
So I'm interested in that perspective because the Secretary of Homeland Security lied to me in this very room when he said under oath that, quote, we have operational control of the border. He then went on to testify in the United States Senate that, quote, well, we can't have operational control of the border under that definition in the Secure Fence Act. And at the same time, Raul Ortiz testified that, in fact, we do not have operational control of the border. Do you think it is a problem for the Secretary of Homeland Security to come into this room, into the House of Representatives Judiciary Committee, and lie about maintaining operational control of the border?
Not only do I think it's a problem, I certainly think, it's that he should no longer be in office.
I think countless Americans share that view, and I appreciate it, and I appreciate your testimony. Mr. Fabricatori, we first got to know each other when I was in Denver, Colorado, around the time that the ICE facility was being unfortunately ransacked and the American flag being turned upside down. I appreciate your service in ICE. Do these numbers sound correct to you, that between FY18 and FY22, that for ICE there's been a 69% decline in overall civil ICE arrests, 65% decline in convicted criminals, 26% homicide related, 53% reduction in weapons offenses, 33% reduction in sexual offense and sexual assault, 58% reduction in assault, 50% robbery, 40% kidnapping, 61% family offense. Is ICE able to do its job under the Biden administration today?
No, they're not able to do their job, and the statistics bear that out.
Can you explain to the United States, the people of the United States, why?
It's the priorities that this administration has put forth. It's limiting what ICE officers can do. It's limiting the Border Patrol agents. Right now we have so many people entering that they're just showing up at the ICE offices, and ICE officers are just basically processing. They're not out on the street making arrests. So these arrest numbers are going to be down, and under these priorities, it's only going to get worse.
And the consequence is dead Americans, the consequences, dead migrants, the consequences, tons of fentanyl pouring into the United States, and it's a direct consequence of the policies chosen to be enacted by the President of the United States and his Secretary of Homeland Security. Do you agree, sir?
I agree, sir.
Thank you. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Correa.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First of all, I want to welcome the witnesses. And Mr. Rosenberg, please accept my condolences for your loss. I'm also a father, and no father should ever.
I appreciate the gentleman yielding. I would yield, Mr. Klein, can you yield to Mr. Roy and then maybe to Mr. Bishop?
I'll yield to Mr. Roy.
I thank the gentleman from Virginia. Despite enormous levels of encounters, I believe last month was about 146,000, far exceeding what Obama DHS Secretary Jay Johnson said at crisis levels of being 1,000 a week. We can agree, I think, that it's possible there may be a decrease from FY22 to FY23 for total Border Patrol encounters, right? They're going down maybe 20%, according to the data I see at current levels. Does that sound right?
I think Congressman, I think they're going down further in light of the approaches that we implemented in a post-Title 42.
Okay, well, assuming they're going down and accepting that they may be going down by Border Patrol encounters, hasn't there simultaneously been a significant and continuing increase at the ports of entry, which more than offset the reductions and illustrate the shell game? OFO encounters from FY22 to FY23, the data I have at current pace is 100% increase. FY20 to FY23, a 356% increase from 241,000 to 1.1 million. In other words, the American people need to be told the truth about what's actually happening. The total numbers, if you look at the nationwide encounters, FY20 to FY21, a 202% increase. FY20 to 22, a 328% increase. FY20 to FY23 at current pace, a 364% increase. In the last 24 hours for Border Patrol alone, nationwide encounters are 6,000. That's the data I have. Is that correct?
Congressman, our approach of expanding lawful pathways and delivering consequences is working.
But is that data correct? Are those the numbers?
I'd have to confirm the numbers that you have cited.
Well, those are the numbers that we have, and this is what the American people are tired of. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentlelady from Missouri. From Texas is recognized.
I thank the chairman. Secretary Mayorkas, on April 28th, 2022, I ask you, quote, will you testify under oath right now? Do we have operational control, yes or no, end quote. You responded with, quote, yes, we do, period, end quote. I then asked, we have operational control of the borders? You responded, quote, yes, we do, period, end quote. Followed up. I said, I read to you the definition of operational control. I actually held up this chart, operational control as defined under the Secure Fence Act. Put it up for plain reading, plain as day. I put up the second part of the same statute, which defines operational control. Means the prevention of all unlawful entries in the United States, including entries by terrorists, other unlawful aliens, instruments of terrorism, narcotics, and other contraband. I said to you, do you stand by in your testimony that we have operational control in light of this definition? You responded with, quote, I do, period, end quote. Earlier, you testified I didn't give you a chance to finish. Yet you specifically, when asked and held up a statute defining exactly what operational control meant under the Secure Fence Act, you said, quote, I do. I believe that was purposeful. I believe you want the American people to believe we have operational control of the border when we very clearly do not. Less than a month later, in Homeland Security, you testified, quote, under that strict definition, this country has never had operational control. This year, House Homeland Security, then Border Patrol Chief Raul Ortiz testified before the Homeland Committee that DHS did not have operational control of the border, either by the statutory definition or not. Now that is an honest answer. In the Senate Judiciary Committee, shortly thereafter, you testified with respect to the definition of operational control, I do not use the definition that appears in the Secure Fence Act. And the Secure Fence Act provides statutorily that operational control is defined as preventing all unlawful entries in the United States, and by that definition, no administration has ever had operational control. If you will recall when you testified here in front of me when I asked that question, when you very clearly stated, we do have operational control, when presented with the actual definition of operational control, you didn't hesitate, you said, I do, and you in fact then referred back and said, I believe that my predecessors would have said the same thing. I asked Chad Wolf that question in this room, and Chad said, well, no, we didn't use that framing to say we have operational control. We're striving to achieve operational control, but you didn't do that. You looked straight at the American people, straight at me, straight at every person on this committee, and said, we have operational control. Why?
Congressman, 2 points. One, you did not let me complete my answer. Two.
Hold on. Let's give me your second point. Go ahead.
Thank you. Two, the Secure Fence Act defines operational control as not a single individual crosses the border.
I'm aware. I read it, and I read it to you, and you read it, and in fact, you said, I do. You didn't hesitate. You didn't say, I do. I need to explain what I mean by I do. You said, I do, over and over again. And here's the problem with that. This is a pattern. Did you lie another time when you said on September 24th, 2021 at a press conference, quote, we know that those images painfully conjured up the worst elements of our nation's ongoing battle against systemic racism when responding to the alleged whipping incident by the Border Patrol agents who report to you. When in fact, on October 22nd, 2022, it was reported that 2.5 hours before that press conference, Marcia Espinoza, Assistant Secretary of DHS Public Affairs, emailed you and CC'd other DHS leadership, alerting you all that the photographer who took the images did not see any whipping occur, invalidating the initial claim. And it wasn't until May of this year that you corrected the record to say, well, let me just correct you right there because actually the investigation concluded the whipping did not occur. Don Rosenberg, in this very room, testified a few weeks ago that you lie. It is a perpetual pattern, and the fact is there are real people that are impacted by that. We have now had, since you testified, we have had something like 200 people a day dying from fentanyl deaths, which would amount to 90,000 people. I showed you before, when you were here, the lost voices of fentanyl, the hundreds, the thousands of Americans that continue to die, 90,000 since you came into this committee and lied to us saying we have operational control. I yield back.
I yield back. Thank you.
Thank you. And the chair yields next to the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Thank the chair. I thank the witnesses for being here. Ms. Scanlon, is Leah Thomas a man or a woman?
Leah Thomas is biologically male.
Did the University of Pennsylvania attempt to silence or censor you or any of your teammates when the news broke about a member of the team swim team would be joining your female swim team?
We had already known at this point that Thomas would be joining our team, and the university advised us to seek counseling if we objected.
Did they try to silence you all in terms of voicing your opinions?
Yes, in fact, I wrote an opinion piece for the school newspaper that was quickly retracted because it was too offensive to be written and published.
Offensive that you were concerned about a biological male competing against you and undressing in a locker room with you and others, that would be, quote, offensive, end quote.
Yes.
What steps did the University of Pennsylvania take to platform Leah Thomas over you and your female teammates?
The University of Pennsylvania nominated Leah Thomas for NCAA Women of the Year. In fact, I found this to be very offensive because there are plenty of other female athletes at the University of Pennsylvania that are very strong and very worthy of that nomination.
Are you familiar with the International Swimming Federation?
Yes.
Do you consider it to be some bastion of right-wing conspiracy or somehow a conservative right-wing organization?
No.
Did the International Swimming Federation ban Leah Thomas from competing at the 2024 Paris Olympics?
Yes, the governing body of swimming put in laws to say that individuals that have gone through male puberty are not permitted to compete in women's competitions.
So, a question for you, Ms. Cole, and first of all, thank you for being here. I've heard some of my colleagues on the other side of the aisle use words like, this frightens me, this hearing. They're frightened by us having a hearing in which you are able to speak to the world about what you have gone through. And I've heard colleagues on the other side of the aisle say, life is worth it, in the context of pushing a particular worldview and saying life is worth it. I would just ask to say that I just want to make sure that you know, like from our standpoint, that your life is worth it, and that the people that have gone through this, that your lives are worth it. And I'd wondered if you'd like to comment on the worth of your life and the social pressures and the pressure placed on you to pursue a path that you now believe was not the correct path.
I think we're all on the same page here, that everybody's life and right to happiness is worthy. And that's what we're all fighting for, even if we don't necessarily agree on what that means. And if I may ask, would I be able to address another witness?
Through the chair, you may. So you may
Okay.
speak to me and reference any other testimony you wish to.
Okay. Well, Mrs. Reynolds.
And you can direct it to me and say that what Ms. Reynolds talked about you want to respond to, and you go ahead.
Well, I understood that Mrs. Reynolds is scared for her child. And I just want to set the record straight that I don't hate her. I don't think anybody in this room hates her. In fact, I see my own mother and my own father in her, and that she dearly loves her child. And she's doing the best with what she's been given. And unfortunately, it's not much. And for that, I'm sorry. I mean, I think every parent deserves the utmost grace and guidance with how to help their child. That being said, I don't wish for her child to have the same result as I did. I don't wish for anybody to regret transition or to detransition because it's incredibly difficult. It comes with its own difficulties, and it's not easy. And I hope that her child gets to have a happy and fulfilling adulthood, however that may look like.
Well, thank you for that, Ms. Cole. I think it was heartfelt, and I know that a number of us share your view. One last question as my time is winding down. Do you believe that the American healthcare system failed you?
On every single level. by doctors and systemically.
Thank you for being here. Narasta, prior to September 11th, 2001, how many individuals had flown airplanes into the World Trade Center and killed 3,000 people?
0.
Thank you. Mr. Scott, how many gotaways have there been?
1.7 million known. That means there's evidence, video, whatever, but I can't give you an estimate on how many we don't know in the hundreds of miles of border that are not being patrolled.
Mr. Narasta, where are those 1.6 million gotaways?
They are most likely at different places in the United States.
Who are they?
Working and living.
Who are they?
Well, they're probably people from different countries around the world, sir.
Probably. People from all around the
They
world.
are from different countries around the world, yes, sir.
Yeah. How many different countries?
Well, if the data that we have about those who are apprehended is any indication, a large number of countries, probably about
162 of them from all over the world?
Probably, yes, sir.
Right. You willing to bet your family's life, my family's life, on the safety of in our country, irrespective of who these individuals are when you don't even know who they are?
Yes, sir. The chance of dying from a foreign-born terrorist attack since 1975 is
sure
1 in 4.4 million per
Mr.
year.
Narasta, I'm sure that is great comfort to the families of the people from 9/11. Because when you sit here and testify that 0 people have committed a terrorist attack from crossing our border, I'm sure that is comfort to the people who had terrorist attacks committed by people who came here and overstayed their visas.
It is
the fact
no
of the matter
comfort
is, the fact of the matter
victim.
is, when you talk about having an open border, and you minimize the open border by saying that people have to pay $5,000 to come here in that open border, you're ignoring the fact of what that does to human beings, when it is in fact so open that that's exactly what's happening. I'm sure that your position is great comfort to the man in Baltimore who was being held up for ransom for $23,000 so that his little girl wouldn't get raped in a stash house in Fort Worth. Have you talked to that little girl or to that father?
Was he a terrorism suspect?
Have you talked to that father, Mr. Narasta?
No, I'm not aware of that terrorism case. What was his name?
Have you talked to that father whose little girl was being raped in a stash house?
No, I haven't. Is this a terrorism-related issue?
I'm answering the questions, and this is the subject matter I want to talk about in this hearing, Mr. Narasta, because you're the one sitting here trying to tell the American people that our border is perfectly fine, that it is perfectly okay, that it is, not open because people are paying $5,000 or $10,000 to get here. So it is very much relevant that a little girl's getting raped in a stash house because of the policies of you and radical leftists who don't give a damn about it, because it is more politically expedient for you to saddle up to the Libertarian Cato Institute or a bunch of radical leftists and talk about, how important it is for people to free flow across borders.
I have talked about the chaos repeatedly, sir. The way to reduce the chaos is through legalization and liberalization, not cracking down more. If you cared about the border chaos, that is the way to do it.
Which will perpetuate the lawlessness, and you know it. Mr. Bensman.
Exact opposite.
Please, Mr. Bensman, can you please expand on your testimony about dozens of terror watch list foreign nationals apprehended at the southern border being members of the Revolutionary Armed Forces of Colombia, or FARC, and how dangerous that is to this country?
Right. One of the most disturbing aspects of the border crisis has been the recent development of FARC-related terror watch-listed suspects crossing that border. Those are people who have spent years and years involved in murder, kidnapping, drug trafficking, extortion, bombings. They are experts in weaponry. These are people who the United States absolutely would never countenance coming across the border or never provide a visa for, certainly. The fact that FARC members, former of the delisted faction, but also there are 2 FARC factions that are still listed, that those people would cross our border and come into this United States is anathema to all of our homeland security values, a terrible development that we should pay a lot of attention to, because a lot of Colombians are coming across. It is true that so far we haven't seen an attack. This is a relatively new thing for FARC, but one thing that we have to worry about is that
when FARC members cross into the United States successfully, they will embed themselves in Colombian immigrant communities and very probably begin intimidation tactics, vigilante justice. This is a terrible thing for Colombian communities inside the United States in general. Plus, these people are professional drug traffickers their whole lives, so we're going to be hearing a lot about FARC people over the next decade. This is not.
Yield back. Thank
this
you,
is
Mr.
not a reason.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you, Mr. Bensman.
Next is Ms. Escobar.
Go ahead.
I'd like to thank Mr. Correa for yielding to me, switching with.
The gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank the chairman. Thank the Attorney General for being here before us today. On October 21st, 2021, before this committee, I asked you about Mr. Scott Smith, a father in Loudoun County, Virginia, who was arrested at a school board meeting where he questioned the rape of his daughter in a bathroom in the public school there. You said at the time you were unfamiliar with the case. Are you now, yes or no?
I'm only familiar to the extent I've read about it in the press.
You sent a memo on October 4th, 2021, directing the FBI and U.S. Attorney offices to address, quote, harassment, end quote, of school boards. Yes or no?
I sent a memo to address violence and threats of violence in connection with school personnel.
Directed at school boards.
Not directed at school boards, directed at school personnel, school administrators.
Throughout the country as a priority for the federal government, for the United States Attorney's Office. That followed a letter on September 29th, 2021 from the National School Board Association to President Biden and emails from the National School Board Association Director Chip Slavin to the White House in which the White House asked for specific threats. And one of the examples was Scott Smith. Subsequent to our hearing 2 years ago, 26 states left the National School Board Association and Slavin resigned on November 23rd of 2021. Last week, Mr. Smith was pardoned by Governor Youngkin. Do you think the governor was correct, yes or no?
Pardon authority belongs to the governor.
You don't have an opinion on whether the governor was correct?
I don't know the facts of the case, so I'm not in a position to make.
Have you rescinded the memo that you issued in 2021, yes or no?
What we're discussing.
Have you rescinded the memo, yes or no?
What we're discussing here occurred.
Does the memo still exist? Is it still going, yes or no? Has it been rescinded?
The memo was intended to have meetings within 30 days.
Has it been rescinded?
The 30 days have finished. Nothing has happened in more than a year and a half with respect to that
But it
memo.
has not been rescinded, it has not been
nothing
pulled back.
to rescind.
Despite evidence that has come out from the National School Board Association commissioned report that White House officials discussed this with DOJ more than a week before the letter was sent, the NSBA apologized. Have you apologized, yes or no?
I've testified 7 times since that original memo.
Well, it's the first time you're back here since we talked about it.
I'm sorry?
It's the first time you're back here in front of us. Have you apologized for putting that memo out that implicated Scott Smith as a domestic terrorist, something the governor of Virginia has now pardoned him from all of these accusations?
The memo said nothing about him, nothing about parents being terrorists, nothing about attending school
So
boards.
the answer is it's not been rescinded and you haven't apologized for it.
The answer is that's not
labeling an American citizen a domestic terrorist in a memo and referring to it and a memo that's built on the back of that. But now we had this compliments being driven to the Civil Rights Division. Let's talk about Mark Houck in Pennsylvania, a father who was arrested with heavily armed federal and local law enforcement in front of his wife and children. This after Mark Houck's lawyers had said he would appear voluntarily. Local authorities investigated, found no case. Mark Houck was arrested by the FBI for FACE Act violations. The jury met for an hour. Houck was acquitted. Now, when I was in federal court, I don't remember that being my result very often. In fact, I don't remember happening at all, where we took it to a jury and it was acquitted after an hour. Did you investigate this or question the United States Attorney why they wasted resources for such an obvious result? And can you explain, yes or no, that that was a good use of the Department of Justice's authority?
The Justice Department respects the jury's verdict. The decisions in that case were made by agents and prosecutors on the ground.
Are you concerned that enforcement of the FACE Act has been biased towards pro-lifers over anti-life protesters, 126-4 by our count? And we're asking information to be able to track down the information of such prosecutions, but 126 times against pro-lifers versus 4 times for people who dare to question the issue of life. I'll leave that out there just to say that is the Civil Rights Division at play. Meanwhile, we've got the very liberal progressive groups being targeted as well. Senator Cruz and I sent a letter to you asking for information about how the FBI informant had gone to a liberal group's pro-life meeting, and yet we didn't get any response from you. So I'd ask if you would respond to our letter that we sent back in March asking about FBI infiltrating such a meeting.
I don't know what you're referring to, but I will ask the Office of Legislative Affairs to look into this letter.
Thank you. Finally, our tax cases require approval by Maine Justice no matter what district has venue, yes or no? Do tax cases as a general matter require approval by Maine Justice no matter what district has venue, yes or no?
It depends on the circumstances in the example that I know you're referring to.
Generally speaking, yes. Since Maine Justice runs tax division, yes or no? Maine Justice runs the tax division.
In the Hunter Biden case, I assured Mr. Weiss that
That's not what I'm asking about. I didn't ask. I haven't mentioned that guy's name. I didn't. I very simply asked a very simple question. Okay. Do tax cases require approval by Maine Justice as a general matter?
Most of the time, but not when the Attorney General has granted authority to a U.S. attorney to do what he thinks is best.
And in a turf battle, if tax division approves changes,
Mr. Chairman, point of order.
I mean, I recall my colleague in Texas having a minute and a half of additional time.
Gentleman's time has expired. The questioning, we'd like to keep going because we are going to have to go to the floor for votes. So if it's okay with you, we'll continue to go. The chair now recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Roy.
Thank the witnesses. Thank you for being here. A couple of questions, particularly for the students, and appreciate you all being here. Have any of the three of you ever in any meaningful way received support from the Department of Education to perpetuate your viewpoints on campus to the best of your understanding?
I have not received any supporting sentiments from them, no.
Yeah. Ms. Jordan?
I have not received sentiments either.
Ms. Silverstein?
I as well have not received any.
Yeah, I hear a lot from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle about how important it is to have these offices of diversity, equity, inclusion. And I'm just wondering if any of the three of you, we have, we dance around these topics all the time in this thing, but we have a white male, we have a black female, we have a Jewish female. Have any of you felt, exalted or supported or helped by these offices of diversity, equity, and inclusion so that you feel comfortable on campuses?
Never. Actually, so the story I was telling earlier about how I was doxxed in a group chat of over 800 students, those were all black students. It was a group chat for black people on campus. And at the time of my involvement as secretary of Young Americans for Freedom, I served as the first-year representative on the Black Student Union, which is an organization within the Afro House, which is a part of the DEI organization department within our school. And they requested my removal. And they had a meeting for that, and they said if I did want to continue being on the board, I'd have to have a discussion with the executive board and their director on how black students can have different viewpoints. I decided to discontinue my position because I felt like that's unnecessary. You shouldn't have to have a discussion on how people can have different viewpoints because that's common knowledge.
Ms. Silverstein, anything to add?
Yes, I would just like to point out that I've only been at Cornell for about a year and a half now, and this problem far exceeds my time at Cornell. It has been a persistent problem on college campuses for many, many years. My brother attended the university about 5 years ago, and swastikas were posted outside of his dorm. Following the Tree of Life synagogue shooting a few years ago, 3 swastikas were found within 9 days on campus. And then we're seeing this happening now.
The university do anything about that?
The university issued what was, in my opinion, a weak response. And clearly it is evident that it was weak as it has persisted on campus and nothing is being done to stop these hateful symbols from being spread around campus.
Ms. Silverstein, quick question for you and a question for the three of you. So I have this concern right now that I believe that we've got a world in which students fear disagreeing with professors, but don't feel afraid for calling for the eradication of Jews, for example. Now, there might be some free speech lanes that are wide enough to have some very hateful statements made, and I certainly support a very wide lane of tolerance with respect to free speech in the First Amendment. But the point here is something a little bit different. Because all of us who have gone to law school and have studied the whole idea of yelling fire in a crowded theater, right? That we all get that there are some limits to speech. Now, I fully associate myself with the remarks of the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, in our need to defend free speech. But I feel like there's something that we are not talking about here that's actually at the center of all this, while we just go around the barn saying the same stuff over and over again. And that is that in a world in the 21st century with TikTok and with a whole lot of, say, political actors and technological actors at play, driving rhetoric and speech and driving what people see as news and information, that we've got elements that are arising to something akin to yelling fire in a crowded theater. I'm looking at TikTok data over the last week, and I'm seeing a massive ramp up of the stand with Palestine versus the stand with Israel. This is not accidental. That's not just something that just materializes. My point is when there's purposeful action designed directly to foment actual response and hate and targeting of individuals, you have now stepped into the very action that the gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, was talking about. So my question for you as students, to the extent that you think that these devices are harmful or helpful for society generally, and I've got my views on that, with respect to TikTok and the use of technology, can you expand on, each of the three of you, the extent to which this, TikTok and others, have been used to dox you, target you, and undermine your ability to engage in free speech and free thinking as conservative or as free-thinking Americans? I'll start with you, Ms. Silberstein, and go down the line.
So from my experience over the past few weeks, the rise in anti-Semitism that we've seen, yes, it has been around in person, at rallies, at protests, on campuses, but a large part of the issue stems from many of the comments made on social media. People think that they can hide behind some perceived veil of anonymity and post whatever comments, however hurtful, however targeted, however menacing they may be. People think that they can post them about Jews with impunity and not receive any ramifications for their actions. So I think that social media in general has been fueling the fire. And as we've seen with the Cornell student who was recently arrested, that veil of anonymity was pierced, and your words have consequences. And I think that all students should really take that to heart, that what you write online can be traced back to you, and people take it to heart.
Ms. Jordan?
Yeah, I feel like technology usage is a double-edged sword, because on one aspect, you can connect with people, especially like-minded people, but that can also be dangerous because it can create a mob mentality, like the experience I've discussed repeatedly. And also, I feel like with social media channels, especially TikTok, they can just create targeted things. Once you like something, then it shows you similar content. So like if someone just happens to like a pro-Palestine graphic, then they're absorbed more and more. And then, once people start sharing stuff on their stories, that's a huge thing. Like if you're the only one who shares an Israel one, then people start like DMing you and attacking you. And it's like a lot of fear, because it's like, are you scared to lose friends and followers? Do you want to stand up for what you believe in? And then that kind of translates to like, being physically involved in groups and organizations on campus. There's like so much fear, kind of what you share online. Like, should you have which side flag should you have in your bio? Things like that are like hotly discussed. And also I feel like a lot of people use online to like kind of organize too, which in one aspect, you can, kind of see what they're up to and what they plan to do to your event, because that's where we find that a lot of people want to protest our conservative events, but also, it makes them gauge a larger community, honestly, of hate. And it's just, I don't know, it's a very hard thing to kind of have discretion over, kind of knowing, what's right, what should be allowed, what shouldn't be. And then kind of in general, it's very, very divisive.
Thank you. Real quickly, Mr. Gridziak, we're way over time, but if you would answer it really quickly.
Mr. Chairman, isn't time? Yeah.
I would certainly like to echo many of Ms. Jordan's sentiments about social media opening up the door to conflicting thoughts. And of course, there's no debate that it certainly does open up to more speech. However, yes,